Ladies and gentlemen, the PlayStation 6 and future Sony handheld seem to be very much taking shape right now and are absolute powerhouses given all of the rumours. Significant upticks in CPU and GPU performance, of course, but also vast improvements in AI, with Sony doubling down on this technology not just for enhancing PSSR, but for many other cool technologies that we're going to be kind of touching on in this video. And speaking of this video, well, given there are so many rumours regarding the PlayStation 6 and their handheld, and also some of my own sources have been giving me some information, I really wanted to put this video out to try to clarify what's going on, because while I think there's a lot of information that's very accurate, I think there's also a few things that are perhaps incorrect. So with this video, hopefully we can get a better understanding of what's going on with Sony's PlayStation hardware in the future, and also perhaps what the direction they may take with future systems. With that said, we're also going to be talking a little bit about RDNA 5, or should I perhaps more accurately call it UDNA. Basically, AMD are renaming RDNA to UDNA, and we'll talk about why in this video. Though I will add, we will also be making another video in the not too distant future, probably around a week or so, when I can clarify a couple of additional details regarding the PC and what UDNA will bring to it in terms of its products. Now, we will again be touching on some stuff regarding UDNA in this video, because it's going to be important given that PlayStation 6 seems to be using a variant of UDNA in its architecture, but a lot of stuff is also going to be discussed in the next video, which is going to again be PC focused. So if you're a PC gamer, you know what to do, subscribe to the channel and all of that stuff. With that said, let's jump right into it after this quick message from the sponsor of the video. Whokeys.com is a trusted and reliable way to save money on Windows 10, Windows 11 keys, as well as Microsoft Office and tons of games coming out on the PC. Let's face it, there are lots of hardware releases over the next couple of months, including all of the Zen 5X 3D parts. We've had Intel's Arrow Lake, plus new graphics cards such as RDNA 4 and RTX 50 are on the horizon, so there's a good chance that you may want to be upgrading for yourself or perhaps a loved one over the Christmas period or early next year, so now is a great time to buy. And I personally use Whokeys for my own copies of Windows 10 as well as other software. Right now, their Black Friday sale offers even bigger savings. You'll find discounts on Windows 10, Windows 11, Microsoft Office, as well as game keys. Plus, you can use our promo code, which is RGT, for an additional discount across their already reduced software range. As a good example, the Windows 11 Pro official price is $199, but using our exclusive code, you can pick it up for just $23 during the sale. Our 25% off code also applies site-wide, letting you save money on a wide range of popular software. You can grab Windows 10 for $17, Microsoft Office 2019 for only $48, and many more great bargains. Simply type in RGT at the checkout and click apply to instantly get 25% off, and then complete your purchase and the key will be sent to your email within 3 to 5 minutes. As mentioned, Whokeys provides safe, legitimate and verified Windows 10 keys starting at just $17 with our code. And don't forget, of course, if you do purchase Windows 10, it automatically qualifies you to a free upgrade to Windows 11. Additionally, there's Windows and Office packages. They also have a wide selection of Steam games, PlayStation Store gift cards, as well as daily deals. So enjoy an extra 25% off during their Black Friday sale with the code RGT. So again, you can save yourself an extra 25% if you use the coupon code RGT, which you can apply in the checkout process. Thanks very much to Whokeys.com for sponsoring the video, and also thank you if you decide to check out the link in the description. It really does help support the channel, and thanks very much for watching the ad. So let's just jump straight into this. Now, firstly, this leaker is from Chip Hell, and Chip Hell is a notorious forum where a lot of folks will be discussing leaks and information that probably shouldn't be public. Now, it is Chinese, so I am going to be using ChatGPT to translate this, and the individual who states this is Zhang Zonghao. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. Now, I'm going to read what they've said, and then I'm going to provide some context, because I do think a few of these things are probably not right. But first of all, there is no RDNA 5 for a codename. After RDNA 4, it shifts to UDNA. MI400, which for those who don't know is a server-based product for compute stuff and AI, and RX 9000, which of course are the gaming GPUs. They use the same UDNA, and the architecture uses an ALU design similar to GCN. UDNA gaming GPUs is tentatively scheduled for mass production in Q2 2026. The PS6 will use UDNA, and the CPU hasn't been determined yet to be Zen 4 or 5. Sony's handheld will also choose AMD hardware. I had heard that Microsoft will choose between Qualcomm and AMD for its handheld, but they're not certain about this. And the above information was from a supply chain, but they don't know the exact specifications or the performance that's being targeted. So, what do I have to think about this? Well, firstly, UDNA definitely is the code name, it's not RDNA 5. Myself and others have been saying RDNA 5, but ultimately this was just because we didn't know at that point UDNA was going to be the name. And obviously you could just say, well, it just kind of makes sense. Now, it's worth noting, UDNA, RDNA, it really doesn't matter. They could call it burger for it all that matters. They could call it, they could call it remote control. It doesn't matter. These are just marketing terms. And yeah, it doesn't really matter. Like AMD's GPUs, even if you go into the drivers, they're like GFX 11, GFX 12, GFX 13, and then there's like multiple different iterations and variants based on different IPs. It becomes very complicated. So this is not a really big deal, but quite frankly, yes, it's true that the GPU architecture is going to be significantly reworked to accommodate both compute and gaming, so you're not going to get two variants anymore. It's not going to be CDNA, it's not going to be RDNA, it's going to be unified DNA. But I'm really not sure why so many websites and folks are talking about like it's new information. Maybe some folks just hadn't known this, but first of all, there'd been a lot of leaks from myself and others that this was going to be the case. But even after those leaks emerged, there's been interviews where AMD themselves confirm this. There's been one from Tech Power Up and another Tom's Hardware. There may be some others, but those are a couple that just spring to mind. I'll leave links to them in the video description, but you can also, of course, see, as I've been rabbiting on, kind of snippets of the interviews in the video. With that said, older AMD GPUs, for those who don't know this history, I'll go over it really quickly, were using GCN. So Polaris, which was RX 480 for example, Vega 64, and even older GPUs such as the R9 200 series were based on GCN of some description or another. Polaris was GCN 4 for example. Now there's a lot of technical nuances and I don't want to dive too much into it for this video, but just to give you guys some kind of grounding, the PS4 was largely based on GCN2, but there were a number of customizations incorporated, which basically meant it had some stuff which I think was in GCN3, but this is from memory. Either way, Mark Sony discussed this. L2, for example, was changed so it had volatile bit, which meant things were just better, quote unquote, for compute stuff. A number of compute queues on the GPU and asynchronous compute engines were also bumped up. Asynchronous compute engines basically mean that you can schedule more work for compute, and the number of compute queues, well, I think that's somewhat, kind of speaks for itself. Either way, AMD then later incorporated this stuff into their later GPUs. But now, if we skip forward a little bit, the PS4 Pro used GCN, which was found again in cards like the RX 480. So this was, GCN4 was basically Polaris. However, Sony again confirmed that they incorporated some stuff for GCN5, also known as Vega. Vega launched after the after the PS4 Pro, and one of the features they incorporated from Vega was Rapid Pack Math, or FP16. This allowed basically a half precision float. So basically this meant you could run two FP16 instructions simultaneously to the same ALU. Basically it just means that more stuff can go brrr simultaneously. AMD then decided to switch to RDNA for gaming, or Radeon DNA. Meanwhile, CDNA was for compute and data center servers. Basically the idea here is that AMD's RDNA would focus on gaming and focus on efficiency. CDNA though, would be for compute, and RDNA was largely ground up design, But CDNA in many ways continued the legacy of GCN, although again, I'm simplifying things. There have been a lot of additions since then to GCN, or should I say CDNA. However, as always, the industry changes. Things like AI, machine learning, compute, all of this stuff is starting to happen, and so again, UDNA is going to be unifying the designs. But there will be some differences in implementation between, let's say, a gaming card and a server GPU, but just to kind of give you a rough understanding. Now, I'm told personally so far that it seems that we're still going to be seeing 2 compute units per workgroup processor. That's the same as, let's say, RDNA 3 or 4. What I don't know, however, is if there's actual changes to the number of ALUs per compute unit. As for the news that RDNA 5, or should I say UDNA, is going to more closely resemble GCN for its ALUs, I haven't been able to confirm this yet. Again, this is going to be a hybrid architecture, so I wouldn't be surprised if there's a really big shift in the design. I'll ask around more from sources, but at this point, I'm unable to confirm this for the video. But let's move on to the PS6, shall we? Because, well, that's what the bloody video is supposed to be about. The link states that the APU uses UDNA and a CPU architecture based on Zen 4 or 5. And there's also a Sony handheld as well. Now, I've spoken about this before, but to my understanding, the PlayStation 6 is almost certainly using some variant of RDNA 5 or UDNA or later. I've mentioned this in videos in the past. In fact, I think I even released one in like February of this year where I discussed this, although I'll get to specifics about this in just a moment, because it is very probable that Sony have done some customization, but again, I'll talk more about that in just a second, because I want to focus on the CPU side of things first. It states here that it's Zen 4 or 5, but I do not think that is correct. I've had actually several people tell me it is Zen 6, and I just think that that makes way more sense. And there's several reasons, because if you were to look at Zen 5, it's currently available right now for the desktop, and also available for various APUs as well, including Sarlacc, which is going to be announced at CES, which is just in a couple of months' time. Now, Zen 5, for example, is a product which is available in the 9950X3D, 8-core, 16 threads, crap ton of Vcache. RDNA 4 launches early next year for the desktop. The rumour is CES, with N48 being the high-performance tier. Zen 6, I discussed in a recent video where I was talking about it, as well as Intel's next-generation processors, and it's looking very likely for a late 2026 launch. It's still going to be on the AM5 platform, at least for the desktop. So, just logically, even if the PlayStation 6 gets released in late 2026, and I think it's going to be later than that, but again, we'll talk about that in just a second, Zen 4 is out of the window. So I think it's much more likely that this is going to be Zen 6, particularly given the desktop release of the RX 9000 series, which are going to be powered by UDNA, is going to be roughly the same time, probably a couple of months one way or the other, between UDNA and Zen 6. Speculatively, I just think this makes way more sense. I've had a source, although only a single source unfortunately, so take it with some salt, that the PlayStation 6 has a very large cache on chip. But if you just look at what's happening in the industry, specifically from AMD's designs, it makes way more sense. Because basically the rumor is with the next generation Zen 6 CPUs, which would be Medusa, they have basically a 2.5D packaging. This is basically going to be the IOD, and everything else is going to be like on this 2.5D packaging with infinity cache links. It's pretty much kind of similar to the N31 design, albeit a little different. And from what I understand, this is going to be a really big deal for APUs going forward as well. I just think because of what AMD are doing for its APUs, for its CPUs and everything else, it just makes a lot of sense for Sony to take advantage of this. Basically, this large LLC, last level cache, would be used between the CPU, GPU, and NPU as well. Like I said, I've only had a single source tell me this is the case, but just logically speaking, look at a lot of leaks for AMD's own stuff, plus official announcements for AMD. It just kind of makes sense. The only problem could be cost, but by that point, a lot of the packaging could be a lot cheaper anyway, so we'll see. Now, like I've said in several videos, the PlayStation 6 seems to have several big targets that Sony are setting. The first is that Sony are doubling down on AI. Now, at the moment, of course, we've already seen some of this with the PSSR implementation for the PS5 Pro, but for Sony, this is just the start. Basically, they want to improve physics, they want to improve the realism in games by having, let's say, improving the handling of cars, fluid dynamics such as smoke and water, as well as having better destructibility of objects, plus, of course, other things that this could bring to the fray, such as better AI for NPCs in games. Now, if you think back to the PS4 and the main benefits the PS5 brings over the PS4, there's a couple of things you're probably going to think of right off the bat, and that's the same with the Xbox, by the way. The first is, of course, the SSD, because obviously you can load data so much faster into the machine, and this means that just worlds can be a lot larger, you don't need to worry about load times, it just makes things a lot better. The other big improvement, of course, was, well, ray tracing, which has a number of visual improvements in a lot of scenes, and we're really starting to see companies like Insomniac really bring that to the fray for the PS5, as well as the PS5 Pro, of course. Unfortunately, one problem for consoles and also the PC is that the bill of materials of parts are just not coming down. Now, this is way outside the scope of this video, and honestly, I could do a whole rant about this, but basically, you've got what I like to call a perfect storm. So RAM and NAND prices are just not exactly falling. This is a really big problem for a lot of reasons, because of data center as well. The production costs of things like TSMC's nodes, especially the more cutting edge nodes, for example 2nm, 3nm, and so on, those are really expensive. So back in the day, you would have like do you remember back in like the Xbox 360 or PS3 era, you'd have like a chip that would release on like 90 nanometers, and it would get refined down to like 65 nanometers, and this is one of the ways, of course, they managed to really reduce the cost of parts, but unfortunately the cost of these smaller process nodes now is so expensive, and they're being absolutely hammered because obviously Apple want them, and all of these companies are all vying for this, and also compute stuff as well for the data centers, so it's just not good, basically. So that's going to really bring a lot of questions into the fray of what Sony are going to do with the pricing of the PS6. Are we going to see like a PS5 Pro pricing structure just for the entry-level PS6? I don't know about that, because quite frankly, it's going to be a big deterrent from users upgrading, and obviously one of the big focuses of a console is you want people to, well, jump to the next generation as soon as possible. It's not just because, well, Sony want to make money on the hardware, because oftentimes they don't really make much money per console sold. Instead, the larger the install base, well, obviously that means that essentially more developers will be more willing to put games on the system, because the larger the install base, the more money they can make. And there's a lot of other things for Sony as well, because again, they're getting a cut of those sales, and it's just a whole thing. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all of that shapes up. Now, given the leaks for the PS6 indicating a 2027 to 28 release, and again, I've said that myself, it's possible we're missing something pretty key from the picture. Focusing again on the GPU, I think Sony are going to provide some customization. I've heard from people that the GPU is going to be a hybrid. In fact, one person told me it's not RDNA 5. This is quite a long time ago. They told me that Sony were probably looking at like RDNA 6, but it's very possible that they just decided to not do that, or maybe that information was wrong. However, another big thing for Sony again is that they do a lot of customization, so maybe there's some elements of RDNA 6, or should I say UDNA 2 to give it its proper name, but it's primarily based on UDNA 1, because again, Sony have done this with the PS4, they've done this with the PS5 Pro, and so on and so forth. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all of this shapes up in the longer, in the longer generation. We also have the fact that Sony also incorporate their own custom stuff on the GPU as well. Honestly, we're going to have to just wait and see. Kepler L2 has also said that there are at least 2 APUs being worked on by Sony, and one of them almost certainly is a handheld, I believe. Now, Sony may change this going forward, but basically, it's quite interesting because there's an official interview with Sony where they said that the PS5 is a 10-year console. Now, you can make a very good argument that they are talking about the software support. Like, if you look at even when the PS4 came out, it's not like they stopped making games for the PS3, right? And the same thing for when the PS5 came out, the PS4 still had games. I think it was it Spider-Man was also on the PS4 as well, and maybe even Miles Morales. Someone correct me in the comments, I'm not certain about Miles. But I've had someone, and they've been very accurate before, tell me that Sony are considering delaying the consoles until 2029 or even 2030. This would allow technology to advance further still, push down prices, and give developers more time to just kind of get up to speed with the current hardware and push install bases up. Now, frankly, I'm not convinced that Sony will delay this long, because I don't think that the PS6 chip is just in very early design stages anymore. I think it's not just in simulation. I think that there's a very good chance, particularly if you're getting this guy who's basically stating that this is from supply chain, it would indicate to me that this is kind of, well, I don't know about necessarily being tested in terms of physical silicon, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're at the very least getting close to that stage. And also, these are really big plans. Like, it would take a lot for Sony to cancel the PS6. Having said that, maybe if they felt like it was necessary, who knows? So I'm just leaving that as kind of like something someone told me, but I don't think I'm too convinced. I personally think 2027 or more likely 2028 is going to be the date that Sony launched this thing. But as for the second chip that Zhang Zonghao mentioned, yes, we've discussed this on the channel previously a couple of times at this point. Kepler L2 again mentioned the fact that there were two chips, and basically speaking, from what I understand, there are two chips. However, I've got a little bit of mixed messaging as to what the two chips exactly are. So one person told me that the second chip is used in a PlayStation handheld, and this handheld can also power the PSVR 3. So one person told me that the PSVR 3 can be powered by either the PlayStation handheld, which again would be using this chip, or the PSVR 3 can be using the PS6 home console. However, and this is perhaps more interesting, I've also been told that the chip is used both in the handheld but also the PSVR 3. So basically, in the first instance, it would not be a device that can operate by itself, but Sony allegedly are considering having a VR system that would be standalone. Now, you can also plug it into the PlayStation 6, so you would get maybe better visuals, and obviously you wouldn't have to worry about battery or what have you. But if that's true, and frankly, I don't know if it's going to end up happening, because the thing is, at that point, and this information is a little bit old, Sony had only been speaking to developers tentatively about what they may do. So I will be very interested to see whether that actually is the case, because I think that could be really cool as a potential option, like having a device where it's essentially just wearable and you could play, like, let's say Gran Turismo 7 or what have you via, PSVR. That would be pretty damn cool. So, as I had finished writing the script and it was actually being edited, another report actually popped up, and this one is from Bloomberg. Now, of course, I will leave a link to this in the video description, but the gist of the article seems to be that Sony are indeed working on a handheld PlayStation, not too surprising, and they are doing this for numerous reasons, not least of which is to compete with the Switch. Now, of course, everyone at this point knows the Switch 2 is almost certainly going to release next year, and the way the article is written in their information, it seems to be almost like this console is almost like a companion to the PlayStation 5, and I don't necessarily think that's the case. Again, everything that I personally have heard is that this is going to be a kind of a PS6 generation console, but of course my information could be wrong. With that said, Kepler L2 on Twitter has also come out and said pretty much the same thing, and that Probably some of the reason for this confusion is that, well, first of all, console generations last quite a long time, and second point, of course, that almost certainly you're going to expect these next generation systems to have backwards compatibility with the PS4 and PS5. I mean, let's face it, it's one of the big reasons that Sony are most likely sticking with AMD, along with a plethora of others. I'll also add, however, that from my understanding, while the console isn't exactly, you can't exactly say, well, it's an Xbox Series S and X, I think there will be a lot of architectural similarities between them. Although I do think perhaps Sony will have more of a hard wall, and this is just my guessing based on what I've spoken to with developers, but just because a game is released on the PS6, it doesn't mean it's going to also be released on the handheld, and perhaps vice versa. And again, it gets so much more complicated because of the PSVR 3 thing that I've discussed in the video. With that said, none of this stuff is certain at this point because, well, Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, God knows how many companies, they all change things pretty much last minute. If you've been following on with the PC stuff, you'll probably know that AMD basically cancelled all of the high-end RDNA 4 graphics cards and everything's on the RDNA 5, or should I say UDNA. Nvidia have changed the Blackwell specifications God knows how many times, so yeah, we'll have to wait and see. I'm very much excited though to see what Sony does with the next generation PlayStation. I am more of a PC gamer, as regular viewers know. With that said, I also want to add into the mix that I don't think Sony are going to be bailing out of the hardware side of things anytime soon. I don't think even the PS6 is going to be the last physical console. Now, I could be wrong here, but just what I've been hearing, I think Sony are very much invested in maintaining its grip on its hardware, because the PlayStation brand, as a hardware brand as well, is so strong. I think Sony can continue to milk this brand for quite some time, especially, again, if the handhelds are pretty successful. Now, it's definitely a bias that I'm going to, admit to here, but while I like streaming, so for example, GeForce Now or xCloud or whatever, I just really enjoy having my games played locally. And I don't think it's just a technical reason of like, oh, well, latency. I think some of it is just nostalgia of having a device quite locally, and there's just something damn cool about opening up a new console on Christmas, especially as like a kid, and you've got it, or hell, even as an adult, you're like, yay! But it's also the same thing for PC building, and you're just kind of messing around with the hardware. I just personally like it. So I do think that streaming has a place, especially over a network. For example, I've got a mini PC right now, and I was streaming games from my high-end system in this office, and then basically streaming it into the living room, and I think that can be pretty cool, playing a game, kind of chilling on a couch or what have you. Or maybe if you're let's hypothetically say, you're going on vacation, you've got your laptop streaming via GeForce Now, whatever. That can be cool, but I just don't think Sony are going to be abandoning the hardware side of things anytime soon. With that said, guys, let me know your thoughts and opinions on this, particularly the streaming. I'm very curious, do you think we're going to get a PS7? Let me know in the comments. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.